I was the consummate gray man at that point. And I used that reference like, well, Jared's very young, doesn't have a lot of experience, but he did great on this. And I used that as the gold nugget in my arsenal that I had. Like, I've done this. And it just led to another thing and another thing and another thing because the industry talks.
Welcome to the Circuit Magazine, the #1 source of information on protection matters, the industry-leading magazine for all security professionals who want to stay ahead of the game.
Succeeding in EP as a grey professional. Today, Jon Moss and myself are delighted to be talking to Jared van Driessche, a cornerstone of the EP and risk management ecosystem, particularly in the States. We're very excited about this topic, mainly because many people seem to have a problem being grey. Do they not, Jon?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one angle. I would also say that there's another side to it as well, where some professionals have trouble being anything but grey. And I think we can, this is really a generalization, but we can look at it as protectors who are perhaps of a generation old enough to be considered pre-internet and certainly pre-social media, of which I am myself, and also of a law enforcement or military background. And the reason I say that is because anyone who's come into the security industry from one of those backgrounds probably comes loaded with almost like a default setting towards secrecy, towards retention, of your own personal information, very, very good data hygiene, to, sometimes the point of paranoia. And I would say that if there's any issue with these people and the grey man, it is that sometimes they can be too grey and therefore too reserved and maybe miss out on some opportunities. Whereas, if we juxtapose that with, the flip of that, which would be, potentially, again, a generalization, but a younger audience who've grown up with social media and perhaps don't come from one of those, institutional establishments and come directly into the security industry where maybe, they've hustled, they've promoted themselves on social media, they do a lot of their networking and connections on the internet. And for these people, it might be a lot more difficult to wear the grey man costume.
Not enough grey or too grey. I suppose that is one of the facets we can sort of talk to Jared about. And I guess, you mentioned maybe a new generation of people who have promoted themselves, hustled, won business by promoting themselves. And maybe there is a happy medium between getting your name out there, a name out there, and operational secrecy. They're not the same thing, are they, Jon?
No, I would agree with that. And I also think that, there's something to be learned from both sides. I think as a default, I mean, and not because I am of that generation that I referred to, I would say the safer side is to be on the grayer side. And certainly that's the approach that I've always taken. But I know myself, I might, if I was to, be really critical of myself, looking at my own career, I would say maybe I've been guilty sometimes of being too reserved. And I would say I've seen in perhaps younger operators and sometimes people who I think are a bit more adventurous, shall we say, that certain things work out for them that I wouldn't have chose, to go that way simply because, I default to that safer grey mode. So, yeah, I think there's something to be learned on both sides of the coin now.
And mastering it is therefore what we need to do, or at least what we need to hope to try and achieve through a chat with Jared van Driessche, who is a very successful EP operator, and therefore we assume a master of being too grey, not enough grey. We'll flesh it out with him. Don't you worry. We've got to uncover this. It's only going to get bigger as more and more people strive to promote themselves, especially in this economic climate. So let's get into it with Jared van Driessche, and operating successfully as an EP professional who's also potentially a grey professional.
And now, let's meet one of the contributors to the Circuit magazine.
Mastering the grey professional mindset. Today, Elijah Shaw and myself are delighted to be speaking with the one and only Jared van Driessche, EP and security expert. How are you doing, Jared?
I'm so wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen, for having me on your podcast. I am a big fan of Circuit Magazine and everything that you gentlemen do. So it's an honor to finally be here with you.
Fantastic. Well, that's very kind.
We were just trying to like warm it up, like have a nice runway for you, you know, a body of work, and then boom.
Hey, don't tell all my secrets, Elijah. I got street cred I'm trying to maintain here.
Well, we'll delve into that street cred and of course your background with that. But before we do that, let's frame this topic. 3 quick fire questions. The grey professional. Why is this still a topic? Why are we talking about it? What is the problem that perhaps anyone could try to solve in that area?
Well, I think the gray man is something that has been an industry topic for, I don't know, the last 20 years. They recently came out with a real shitty movie called The Gray Man. I don't know if you saw it. It's on Netflix. But ultimately, I think it's challenging for people to understand how to succeed in the executive protection realm. And so gray man is one of those concepts that is set there to kind of help people experience some success within our industry. And I think it's not understood to the aspect of how I think I understand it. Maybe I just don't understand it how everybody else does, but I have my unique spin on it for sure.
Okay, fantastic. And we'll get into that, absolutely. But taking a step back, what about you? Where does your passion for EP and potentially being a grey person, I don't know, where does that come from?
Well, I had a very unique childhood in the sense that it is, my therapist said that I had, I think, the worst physical childhood abuse that she'd ever heard of in her 20-year career. So I feel really proud about that. I'm kidding. But, you turn a negative into a positive. And so, as a kid, I don't think I felt protected or safe in the way that I would have wanted. And so things have kind of led me down the path to protecting people. And I think from a psychologist's point of view, I'd say I probably get that really awesome dopamine hit when I protect people and I do something. So I don't think it's necessarily healthy, but being purposely vague, that's kind of how I got into this industry. I decided it was something I wanted to do when I was 15 years old, started working towards that goal at 15, started working at 19, and got going at 21, in the industry. So, and I've done kind of everything there is to do in the security realm. I used to bounce at different clubs in the Seattle area. And I worked at a hospital. I did uniform security, and I've traveled the world to more than 80 countries now and work with the who's who of Hollywood and celebrity entertainment and Silicon Valley folks. So that's a fast and dirty rapid fire response, gents.
Yeah, no, and thank you for being so candid again with your origins and your experience, and maybe we'll have a look at that in more detail. But sure. but thanks for of course sharing that. What about the protector listening who is on a journey thinking, I should be grey, or I should be more grey, I should be less grey? The uninitiated protector that's not yet solved that balance. Well, what should they better understand?
Well, I like what I tend to like better than the term gray man is social chameleon. And that's something that I have written a lot of articles about. For example, I used to work with a hip hop group, and we would travel and do different shows. And so the way that I would dress and the way that I would speak would be different than when I was traveling with another Grammy Award winning professional musician that played professional violin. And we would go to these places in Austria where you don't clap, and there's a whole etiquette to how many encores the client's going to do, and who claps and who doesn't clap, and do you clap during the set or after, and when are the appropriate times, and how do you sit and how do you dress, and those are two different worlds. And so understanding that I can't do the shit that I did with, you know, the hip hop group or the rock group that I'm with, I need to understand this classical music realm and adjust myself and be the quote unquote gray man or the social chameleon to blend into that environment. So I am not a misrepresentation of the principal's brand. And that's something that people don't understand at all.
So first of all, I really like where you're taking this, and I'm familiar with a little bit of your perspective. And even though we were setting up this topic here, I was really for it because I knew you were going to offer an opinion that maybe wasn't the norm.
Sure.
And so even when we're talking about social chameleon, and you use that great illustration, because I do agree with that. But I guess I'd like to start saying, like, that there seems to be a school of thought in some circles that there's only one way to perform protective services. And, you know, I think just from the onset, those that don't know you, the listeners, would see that you probably don't subscribe to that.
No.
Like, you know, what's your outlook on this piece here?
Well, I think it all depends on risk profile, depends on the client. I mean, we can have all the best ideas on the planet as to how security needs to be or where the principal needs to sit and what the principal needs to do. But ultimately, the principal says, nah, I don't want that, or I want this. And so you have to adapt and you have to overcome. And a lot of people don't get that. When, you know, I've conducted training and Elijah, I know you've done a lot of training with folks, and a lot of times you'll work with new agents, and you'll be playing the role of the principal, and you'll sit in the front seat, and they're like, sir, no, you need to sit in the back. I'm like, oh, so you're going to say that to your billionaire client or the most famous entertainers in the world? No, you would not. And so they don't understand that concept because they haven't been in that world. And so, you know, there's book smarts and there's street smarts, and you're not going to learn everything that we do from a book or from a class. You have to experience some of that. And, you know, doing this over 20 years, you know, there are some things there that I've learned and mistakes that I've made. So, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I always think about the piece, like you said, when you talk about, use the example of jumping in the front seat. I always use the example of the client, you know, opening their own door and getting out of the car. It's like, what are you going to put them back in the car? Say, no, you can't do that. It's not safe. And it's, you know, there's real world and there's textbook. So to your point there.
Yeah.
So I guess along those lines, did you develop that perspective, or it was kind of like a trial and error piece? Like, did you set out to reinvent the wheel?
Well,
or
what I understand, and, you know, training and everything, when you're a new agent, everybody says, be a gray man. And that's because you can't teach social emotional intelligence to a lot of people. Like, if you're an incel, do you know what an incel is? It's somebody who's involuntarily celibate, meaning they couldn't get laid in a morgue if they tried. They have no personality. They have no anything. And so it works for those people that are a little bit more rigid and understanding. It's a good mold to kind of put somebody, like, be the gray man, and then see how they do with that, and then figure out how to let them thrive when the training wheels are off. And so what I noticed is, yes, the gray man is a tried and true and something that's talked about for years, but certain clients are like, man, can we just talk, or can, you know, we chit chat, or can you, you know, show me that you're a human being? And, you know, and being smart enough to understand when they say, hey, Jared, good morning, how you doing? I'm not going off about how my dog is sick and my kid has a wrestling tournament or whatever it is. It's understanding the gift of gab and understanding what to give and what not to give. And sometimes it is a slippery slope. So people say, be the gray man, be the gray man. The other point I have too is, if you're working with a client that are what I call fashion plates, or, people that make their money by dressing a certain way and having a certain style, I can't take that gray man style and stand next to them without ruining their brand. And I've had clients that have had endorsement deals with Puma or endorsement deals with Nike. Well, guess what? When I'm working with the client that has the endorsement deal with Nike, I can't be wearing some Pumas because it's their brand. People just don't understand that. That's a concept.
Or even some hard bottoms.
Yes, yes. If you're wearing those hospital shoes, like that doesn't work. Or you're wearing, some shit you got at Sears or Macy's that your grandpa wears. It's not going to look good next to the starlet or next to the movie star that actually understands fashion.
Sure. Which is, that's a good segue into this next piece here, because, just that illustration there, that's, if you take, for instance, a celebrity client, that's a high profile individual. And, sometimes people think, well, you have these discussions about high profile and low profile, and everything trends towards low profile. However, there's some clients that you need to be more overt than covert. Am I right with this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the thing that they don't want to say, or the industry doesn't say, is, the EP industry is unfair in the sense that if you're good looking, you're probably going to have more opportunities. People don't talk about that. If you're big and you have muscles and you have a presence, that there's a niche for that, and you're going to be have some success. But if you're somebody that doesn't know how to dress or doesn't know how to speak, or maybe you're not the best looking person on the planet, and it's not like I'm not a model by any means, but
by some means.
But by some means, yes. In my own mind, right? When I look in the mirror and I had a good night's sleep in the morning, I feel like, hey, maybe I'm doing pretty good here. But ultimately, I mean, we've seen it, Elijah. I know you've seen that directly, where a client's like, get this Jared guy out of here, and you're like, why? Well, he's 5'5", and he's got love handles, and it's not the representation of who I want standing next to me, or whatever it is, right? It could be he's got a weird eye or a twitch, or this long hair that comes out of his nose, whatever it is. But this is an industry like the entertainment industry in general, where looks are important, and it is a skill, or it's not a skill, but it is a tool. So if you have it, you might as well use it. Like Elijah, you're not a bad looking dude. I mean, if you were an ugly guy, you probably would not have been in Confessions. Right?
Really going to bring that up?
Yeah, of course. Of course. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions about that, and misconceptions about how to go about this. And I'm sure there's people that'll disagree with me, and I think that's fine too. I have no problem defending my position of the lens of the window that I look out of on the plane that I'm flying, right?
I think this is quite interesting, especially for the newer professional, because they might assume when we say great man, woman, professional person, when we say that, maybe we're talking about discreet, plain vanilla. And you've brought in a whole new dimension to it, because I suppose it's not that it's right or wrong, because there's one. Are you sharing operational intelligence about your client? That's probably bad. But are you visibly part of the entourage? That's a whole new question. And I think that dynamic people don't really get. So for the new operator, now obviously we've got lots of operators listening, new, long in the tooth, international. For the new operator, how can they start to balance that? Because there's always going to be a drive to try and impress, try and get a new job anyway, because you might be a solo operator. So you want to leverage one job to get the next. You can't use, your client's name, but you could dress the part, and then you want to take Instagram pictures. How are they to navigate that?
Yeah, typically, if I've never worked with a principal before and they don't know me or know my reputation, I tend to take more of a gray man approach. and I try to read the room quickly to figure out what style that they're interested in. I'll give you an example. I had one client that at that time, it was one of the biggest people on television, big television show, and did a lot of controversial topics. And so he would get nervous all the time, and he would want to talk. He hated having, quiet time. And so he would talk about baseball, and I could give a fuck about baseball. I don't like baseball. I don't understand it. I could name like 3 players in baseball, and it's like Babe Ruth and maybe Barry Bonds. I'm struggling for a third.
Randy Johnson.
But yeah, exactly. It could be anybody. So I understood that this was his thing and this was his comfort. So what I would do is the night before, I would, back when people would read newspapers, I would, read the newspaper and get the stats on how the Mets played and what, how many RBIs or hits or whatever. And so I could kind of like chat and bullshit with the principal a little bit on something that was just topical, and it made the principal comfortable, and then in turn allowed me to kind of blend into that environment. Now, I wasn't forcing the conversation. And let me just say, if you can avoid having a conversation with the principal, I would say do that. But sometimes it's warranted. And there's other times you'd be with the principal. I remember driving through, the mountain, the Alps, the Swiss Alps, with a client, and not saying a word to each other for like 4 hours in the car. And you're just like, oh my God, this is so weird. But that's the style and what the client wanted. He wanted absolute silence, and the other client wanted to talk about baseball. So understanding that it was my job, it's always our job in this industry to figure out how we make it most comfortable and effective for the principal, not try and force my shit onto their shit, And do I have my own personality? Do I like to say a lot of 4-letter words and jokes and all of that? Yes, I do. But I know when to lock that on and when to lock it out. And a lot of times it's it can be challenging, and it's not easy, and it's hard. It's hard for a lot of people. And that's why there's not a lot of people that have long-standing success in this industry. If you look at it, it's kind of the same players over and over again. If somebody's made it 3, 4, 5 years, it's like, wow, this person's probably going to be there down the road.
So what I find interesting about that is, the Circuit podcast is a security podcast, and we lean heavily towards the executive protection side. And this conversation, we're deep into it. And while we're talking about executive protection, we're not talking about guns or drop kicks. This piece here, the mindset piece, the ability to maintain a relationship with the client that keeps you working, so that way you can be in the industry for more than just one assignment, more than just one detail, more than a month. And when the client needs something, they go, no, I want that guy. I want Jared back on the team, so that they're championing themselves for you, and their staff is championing and other members of the detail. And that's all, that's part of the protection work. That's part of the training that we need. And, obviously that's not as sexy. And, the majority of courses aren't going to delve into that, but it's such a vital piece, because that's what leads to that continuity where you continue to get those phone calls. And I think to your point is that when we start off, it's such an awkward place for us to be in, right? It's like, oh, I'm the new guy on the job, whatever the detail is, like I'm the fucking new guy. And you're there, you're like, do I talk? Do I not talk? Do I act friendly? Do I act standoffish? But those initial impressions, if we can't get over that learning curve, we end up writing it out for whatever the extent of that is, and then you might not get the phone call the next time. So it's being able to navigate those spaces.
And we're not always successful. I've had some fucking failures, man. I had one client that I just had the hardest time relating to, and the client, the only thing I could relate to him was talking about beautiful women. Like he was, all about them ladies, and so that was the only topic that I could discuss with him. So we were talking about beautiful women at one point, and I made a joke. I said, yeah, when you're an ugly guy like you and me, we got to try harder. We're not, pretty like these ladies. And he looked at me and goes, what do you mean? I'm not ugly. And then I was like,
Oh dear.
like, fuck, I'm joking. Like, how did you get this? I go, well, wouldn't it be weird if I said you were a good looking guy? And it was like, bomb, bomb, bomb. I just totally insulted.
Just kept digging at home. Huh?
Like, yeah, that was a relationship that ended. You know what I mean? And then there's other times where I've had great successes with clients. You know, like I had a client, we would travel everywhere, and we would work maybe 21 days in a row, and we'll be country to country, and then it would just be for months and months. I mean, I was almost 300 days a year on the road, and he kept telling me like I was we had a good rapport and everything, and I wouldn't recommend this, but I'm just going to share it with the group because that's who I am. And so we would travel everywhere, and every time we go to Israel, he'd say, Jared, like you got to get rid of your phone. You got to get a new phone because they're tracking it or blah, 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 blah. And you're tired and you're on the road. And, I'm like a lowly agent at this point. Like I don't have that much money. I can't get a new cell phone every time I go. So I finally joked with the boss and I said, well, if they're super interested in seeing the dick pics that I send to my wife, then they're more than welcome to hack my phone. And he just kind of looked at me and had this guttural laugh, and we laughed about it. And it was an amazing relationship with the principal that I have and has continued for years. Now, would I tell anybody to do that in a school or that I was teaching? No. Was it probably the smartest decision that I made? No, but we're human. And so sometimes not everything is black and white. Sometimes it's gray. Sometimes it's not, right? So I don't know if that helps you guys, but
no, for sure. And I think, part of that is one of the things I like about you is you're pretty unfiltered. But it gives perspective, because I like to think that, obviously there's a training component, but there's an experience component that comes to something. And part of experience is that trial and error. Some stuff works, some stuff doesn't. But our individual experiences are kind of colored by our backgrounds. Sure. So we'll bring in some type of baggage, good stuff or bad stuff, but we'll bring that to the detail. Yeah. And sometimes it'll work, with you and your teammates and you and the protectee, and sometimes it doesn't. But when it works, use that to your advantage.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You got to use everything that you can, and you know what? It's a double-edged sword. My frankness and openness and everything has allowed me a lot of professional success, but it's also been probably my greatest hindrance. And understanding that the sword cuts both ways. So and we're not all perfect, and that's the shit that annoys me about our industry is this like wannabe tough guy thing, or we can't show vulnerability, or we can't be honest about shortcomings or fuck ups or anything. It's like we got to be the alpha, we got to be better, we got to hate on everybody. And you know what? I probably fell into that trap too early in my career. I'm not the same person at 40 as I was when I was 20, and it kind of is what it is.
So those 20-year-olds then, I know I keep on going back to it because I just feel for new entrants. Okay,
you're for the youth.
Yeah, the youth. I feel for them.
Youths.
The youth of today. I feel that they have to navigate how to be a butler, how to be a bag handler, how to be a grey professional, how to be charismatic when it's appropriate, when the guardrails have been let off, they've been let free, but they also have an inclination to take a selfie up against, I'm thinking of one particular person, they have an inclination to take a selfie up against an innocuous background, a leafy green bush. And then they get done. Someone says, you're giving the game away. You're telling us where your principal is. And they're 100% not. Or they have, in their own time, done 2 camera pieces to talk about whatever they like, okay? But then they're clamped down. You work for me. You don't do any social media posts, even about your teeth whitening. Yeah? It sounds like a tough mission for them. Do you think it's tough? And if it is, how can they navigate that?
Yeah, I think it's tough. you're going to have all the there's so many gatekeepers in this fucking industry where it's the old dogs and they don't like to have anything new or anything different in regards to this is the way that it's done, Sonny Jim, and this is what we did back in 79, and so they don't understand the new realm or the new world, so to speak, of executive protection. And, I'm not the selfie guy. Do I have a ton of pictures on my computer that I could pull up and show you an ego file? Yeah, we all have an ego file on our computers of shit that we've done. But I would say you really have to know, one, are you working for yourself? Or are you working for somebody else? And so if you're working for yourself, you have more leeway and freedom to do what you think is right. Now, we have different definitions of right. I'm not one that typically will disclose who I've worked for, who my principals are, because I kind of look at it as it's when you work with me, it's like going to Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So I'm paid to keep my mouth shut, and that's part of the, to use a hokey term, the samurai code of what it is we do. I don't share secrets and stuff regarding principles. But I think that there's a whole different group of young folks. I don't know, is it Generation Z? Is that the young ones?
Yeah, Gen Z.
Yeah. So the Gen Z, they've grown up, with smartphones. I'm not that young and I'm not that old, but we didn't have smartphones when I was in high school. So now there's a different culture of it. And so it also depends on what the reason is for sharing information. Sometimes it's clout or to try and, bolster getting women or whatever it is. But I think people don't understand how that can last forever if they're posting things online. And again, depends on the client. Certain clients don't care. And I remember 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it used to be like, you always have to wear a suit and tie when you're doing corporate. Well, what about Silicon Valley, where your principals are in board shorts and t-shirts and sneakers, you know what I mean? And hoodies. So
I agree.
That whole old adage, it dies. It's not relevant anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the industry evolves.
Yeah.
And everyone has to evolve or we're going to go the way of the dinosaur. Mm-hmm. With that said, though, I think they're best practices that are timeless. Mm-hmm. And then the last part I'd ask to that is that there's cause and effect. So, even in a situation where you're posting a picture that you might think is harmless, if the person that's the check writer feels a different way, they're entitled to that feeling.
Sure.
So it cause and effect. So, and if you make it to a certain part of your career where you can hey, I can do what I want, you're entitled to whatever opinions you want to have, whatever political beliefs, religious beliefs, all those things. And you can incorporate that into your protective operations to whatever degree works for you. But for the person that's writing the check, they get to set the terms. And one of the things you mentioned earlier was that our industry isn't fair. It's not where you can just open up the code book and go, see this line right here? Yeah, you violated this code. It's subjective based off of whoever is in a position of authority. No, it's not fair, but there's a reality to that.
Yeah, I think there's that saying, it's like wear the wrong shoes on the wrong day, you're out. And it can be anything that you can do. And it doesn't be fair. And you can have the greatest guy in the ever on your team. That's the most amazing advanced person, but it's just a personality thing. Or I just don't like that dude's energy. Well, he's not working. Doesn't mean that he's, not a good person. And that's tough. It's tough to take losses. It's tough to take L's. And it takes a certain personality to be able to overcome those L's, and that's why the industry is still a niche industry. It's hard.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be easy. Yeah. But I think sometimes the perception is that the only hard parts are the tactical stuff like running and gunning. But it's the hard parts are just those social dynamic pieces, navigating that space.
Okay, so I'm a poor white boy that grew up in Alaska. The first time I was on a private jet, with a gold toilet and sink. I get on the airplane, I'm losing my fucking mind. Like, this is the most amazing shit ever, right? I get on the plane, I act like I've been there 1,000 times, but I'm like having to look at people like, how the fuck do these seatbelts work? I don't know how the fuck the seatbelt works. You know what I mean? And
100%, I know what you mean.
Yeah, that's a you can succeed or you can fail. You know, if I'm too much of a fan when I get on that jet, then it's like, what are you doing here, young lad? You're not meant to be in my orbit. So it's like, I've been on there 1,000 times. Meanwhile, in my inside, like, holy shit, the toilet is gold. You know, wild.
Yeah, that's amazing, bro. And I guess maybe that's a great segue to like the last question I have for you, which is, you know, I mentioned earlier, I admire you because you know your shit, but at the same time, you're not pretentious with it, in my opinion. So how do you balance operating at a high level in the craft with not letting it go to your head? You know, that jet that was new to you years and years ago, now it's a common occurrence. So you know, so how do you, again, not, you know, where it's like, hey man, you know, you can be the shit without everyone knowing you the shit. So how do you find that balance? How do you strike that right chord?
Well, I don't know. I'm like the anti-tough guy, if it makes any sense. I'm not the one that is, I'm not the stereotypical alpha guy. I feel like life has crushed me many, many times. And so I try to be really cognizant of, okay, this hurts right now. Like, I'm at a super low. Remember what this is like. And when you're riding high, I also know that there's peaks and valleys in this world. And for a long time, I was pretty fucking arrogant. And because I had a lot of early success. And so it did go to my head, and I was a total fucking prick. And then I had some missteps and I had some failures, and that certainly was a wake-up call for me. And I've always tried to do my best, and I've always tried to have integrity, but there was some arrogance there. So I think it's just, I'm a little bit longer in the tooth now, and I have scars on my body and scars on my soul, for the sake of using a term I don't believe in, that remind me of those things. And so, and the other thing that I always remembered, I remembered trying to get into this industry, and I remembered how hard it was and how people wouldn't take me serious. And I reached out to everybody and was like, hey, can I take you out to coffee and bend your ear? And then, you know, people were like, yeah, fuck you, kid. And then I remember 10 years later, people wanting to take me out to coffee. And I'm like, you remember that shit like 10 years ago when you wanted nothing to do with me? Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. So I think it's just experience, man. And I wish I could, you know, getting a little bit older, I wish we could take these young cats and be like, hey, man, cut out with this macho shit. You're not the biggest. You're not the baddest. There's always somebody that can whoop your ass, and always somebody that has more experience. And so it's like this, you know, touting of resume or whatever. And I don't know. I think life has beat me down, and that's why I'm better with it than I have been in the past.
No, I think that's a great answer, because I think, you know, if I had to guess, or I had to just turn the question back on myself, it's from those life experiences. So it's a process, you know, like you so humbly mentioned that there was a point where you were a dick, you know, and a lot of people can't acknowledge that, but it was growth, it was evolution. So, kudos, man. I'm glad to see that, you know, one, you've got perspective. And even though you mentioned the peaks and valleys, I like to think that we're not in a valley right now. And then the other thing is that you're just, you know, you're honest enough and open enough to share with other people, because somebody listening to this is going to be able to take a jewel away from it, and hopefully that helps their career. So kudos.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate your response to my answer.
And, you know, just as an observation, you've done all of this whilst remaining operationally grey.
Had to get that in there, huh?
So, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just tying it back to the great person thing, because I think a lot of people say, well, how am I going to promote myself? Well, there's a lot of things you can talk about. You can talk about your hobby. You can talk about a whole bunch of other things.
Sure. Listen, how I got my start, I was bouncing, and then I was like super young. I'm like, please put me on this detail. Let me do it. I mean, the industry talks. And so it was like, I remember my first detail was like a strike detail, like some mass firing in Michigan or something, some corporate downsizing. And I'm like, I gotta kill this thing. And I remember I went to go and rent a car. I was too young to rent a car because in America at that time, I don't know what it is now because I don't look at that, but you had to be like 23 or 25 to rent a car. And I had to like hustle to get the rental car. Like, oh no, work is flying me out here. It's not me renting it. And then so I'm like, this is embarrassing. I can't tell my boss I could barely get a rental car. And so I went and I did the job. And I did the best that I could. I didn't self-promote myself. I didn't stick out. I didn't try and make relations with the principal or whatever. It was like I served the master, and that was the person that hired me. And so I used that in the sense of just give me a good reference. Can I use you as a good reference? And so that person, I was the consummate gray man at that point. And I used that reference like, well, Jared's very young, doesn't have a lot of experience, but he did great on this. And I used that as the fucking gold nugget in my arsenal that I had. Like, I've done this. And it just led to another thing and another thing and another thing because the industry talks. And it's like, well, I work with Jared. He's either a prick or he's not, or he did a good job or he didn't. And so that should always, in my opinion, if you're starting out, that should be your calling card. Did you serve your client the way that it needed? Did you promote the company in the way that the company wanted you to promote them since they put you on? Those are the small things. Lay the tracks of the train in the right way, and then you're going to get in the direction. The tracks will be laid, and then the train will be going down the track, and you'll have a ton of success. But it's really doing a good job in the beginning and being responsible and responsive. So hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And that was inherently soundbite worthy. I'm definitely going to cut that up and put it on the front of this episode. I think that is a nice nugget. But yes, this question will never go away, but it's wonderful to have a fresh perspective from yourself. Obviously, wealth of experience. It's probably the best type of podcast on this that we've had, and it's wonderful to be here with Elijah. Obviously, I am Mr. Generalist, so this is fascinating for me as well. So the grey professional, I love it as a topic, but I think it is absolutely done. You've done it a lot of justice. All right. My sycophantic rant over. Thank you very much for joining us. This has been another fantastic edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast.
Jared, thanks for coming out.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Well, thank you very much, Jared van Driessche. I think that was excellent, but it also took the debate in many different directions, most notably being grey with your professional. I'm back with Jon Moss. Jon, how was that for you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think, that's not necessarily the angle that we were anticipating so much, but it's interesting nonetheless. And it's certainly, it's one that we were, of course, familiar with. And I think, for lack of any other term, we probably just branded it under the banner of professionalism. But then professionalism is so broad in itself, isn't it, that maybe there is a place for actually taking it and dropping it into the whole grey man. Certainly, if you're looking for a shortcut to remembering things, and maybe that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, because it speaks to a service mindset as well, doesn't it? And I can imagine an episode of Downton Abbey where the staff are flies on the wall. They're discreet. They're not opinionated. But equally, when you can judge that the time is right, you can open up. Maybe there will never be a right time to open up, but surely that's a good way of looking at the grey professional as well.
Yeah, I think so. And the only thing that I think initially I kind of hesitated over is I think there is, if we go back to, let's call it the traditional view of the grey person, and what we referred to in the intro, then there's definitely times when it's right to be grey, and there's some times when you can be, shall we say, less grey, depending on where you're at in your career, the objectives, like for instance when you move on to being a business owner and stuff like that. However, when it comes to your interactions with the principal, and particularly when it's a new principal and you're starting out, you're building that rapport, you're getting to know where the boundaries are, I think almost always the level of professionalism remains the same. Your approach, the boundaries don't change. You have to feel that out. You have to, be very delicate with that. Well, maybe you don't. Maybe your mindset is, this is who I am. If I'm not the right protector for you, maybe it's better that we both learn that sooner. I mean, that's an approach for some, perhaps.
Yeah, and I suppose it depends how seasoned you are, or how financially secure you are, even, because you could really lose some work, or perhaps you'd get the best ever client ever. Who knows? But I like that, balancing being a great professional outside with being a great professional inside, maybe not both at the same time. How do you promote yourself? How do you win business? And I think many people will know of an example where someone has overstepped in sharing, but actually also there are some examples of people new in their career who have shared something that's 100% not revealing anything about anything, but they still got into difficulties about it. So it's still a grey area.
Yeah, and it's really interesting what you just said, because I think for a lot of us, when you're starting out in your career, the way that you become as a more seasoned professional is often by the experiences and the influences you have, when you're first coming into the industry, because a good protector would be looking to their more experienced counterparts to see how they handle situations. And I think, for most of us, we learn our biggest lessons from the mistakes that both we make and that we see others make. So I think often our boundaries get defined by those experiences, those formative experiences.
And talking about formative experiences, I'm doing a segue. It's going to be lovely to see so many of the BBA, NABA, and Circuit Magazine readership and community at our CP Tech Forum on the 26th of January. Are you going to be there, Jon?
I certainly am. I wouldn't miss it. It's one of the first dates, the first events that I mark in my calendar, not only because it lands in January, which I think is very strategic, but no, it has certainly become one of the most enjoyable events, and one that I get one of the greatest ROIs on. And
we, I'm obviously very, very pleased you say that. I hope you're not just saying because I'm here, but I think it is a labor of love, and we have a lot of international colleagues coming this time, from the States, from Germany, from Sweden. Somebody said South Africans are coming over. If you are, please do let me know. And I think there's been a wider interest from some of the diplomatic corps, which I think speaks to what we're trying to achieve. And that, of course, is on the 26th of January in London, Grand Corner Rooms. But we just dropped out the latest edition of the Circuit Magazine. What can people hope to see there? And I think you might have created a sort of a video on our YouTube channel lately.
Yeah, there's if you want a closer look at what's inside the magazine, go to the Circuit Magazine YouTube channel, as you said, and there's a video there which is a bit of a flyover. You'll quickly see pretty much the majority of the magazine in about a minute. But no, it's packed. It's a really, really good issue. We've got fantastic contributions from Danida and Chris Grow. We've got Christian Zerkowitz. We got so much in there. We've got 2 medical features in this issue. James Bohr with his usual cybersecurity fundamentals. We've got lessons for protectors on your observational skills. There's so much in there. So much.
And so, obviously, if you're already a subscriber because you're listening to the podcast, great. But an ask is that if you're not yet a subscriber to the magazine, please do subscribe, because it is well worth it. We are bringing the pages of the magazine to life in our audio format here on the podcast, but it wouldn't be possible without the fantastic magazine itself. So please do make a subscription, a New Year's resolution. That could be your New Year's subscription. Why not? But apart from that, keep all of the comments coming. Keep the BBA Connect app as lively as you have been, especially over this wonderful January season, as well as the NABA Connect app as well, the Protector app. From Jon and myself, it's been great to talk to Jared van Driessche today. Obviously, a big beast of the industry, and we are very pleased that he was able to give so much of his time talking about grey professional success in EP. So, from Jon and myself, this has been another fantastic edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast.
You have been listening to the Circuit Magazine podcast. Be sure to subscribe and be sure to not miss an episode.